Thanks for tuning in to this week's show right here in Mass. Today's podcast guest is Lisa Drennan, who has a 39-year career supporting individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities to be active and engaged within their community. In 2018, Lisa launched her company, Merge Inclusion Consulting, where she provides consultation, staff training, and systems implementation to community entities committed to recreation, sport, and enrichment program inclusion. Lisa, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ashley. So glad to be here.
My pleasure. Please share more with our listeners about you and what you do.
Yeah, so I am a resident of Pembroke, Mass. I've been born and bred here and pretty much spent my whole life except for the years that I went to college at St. Michael's in Vermont. And so my career started, when I was 17 years old. I worked at New England Village. That's a residential community for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I spent 30 years there, all different roles, from being a direct support staff, recreation director, and then my final role, which I love, was helping to build and create the Sollar Wellness Center, which is on their campus, and that offered enrichment opportunities, such as music and art and fitness, and we had a pool, so aquatics opportunities as well, and that was just a big part of my life. But that was my stepping stone into my next years, where I worked at the South Shore Y, and I was their first director of inclusion, and that was a wonderful experience, very eye-opening to think about teaching the rest of the world how to be more inclusive, right? Mm-hmm. So, it could be anybody from a camp counselor, somebody who works the front desk or teaches yoga, and teaching them how to be more inclusive of folks with disabilities. And that was what got me to start Merge. Basically, it was just that eye-opening, like, whoa, we have to teach the rest of the world how to do this. If they don't have the tools and the confidence, how is it going to really happen? And I started Merge in 2018, and that's what brings me here to you today.
I think it's amazing that at 17 years old, the first job that you have is really that first experience and that first introduction to working with people with disabilities that just sparked everything after that within your career. Almost 4 decades later, I think that's remarkable.
Yeah, no, it was natural. I don't know how to describe it. And often I would get comments from friends or family's connections like, oh, you're such an angel. And that always made me cringe a little bit, like, sorry, everybody said that to me. But no, it was just, I enjoyed what I did. And there were times, I'm going to be honest, I felt like I'm getting paid to do this. This is, unbelievable. It was really, I enjoyed the growth that I experienced there, and, providing opportunities for not just myself, but the men and women that I was supporting.
Absolutely. And with New England Village, when you got that job, did you get the job just because it was something that was open, or at 17 did you already know that you wanted to work with people with disabilities, and then that's when you found that position?
Yeah, I didn't particularly, I wasn't going out to seek to work with this population, but a friend had worked there, and I'm like, wow, that's super cool, right? And I had grown up, or my parents' best friends had a daughter who had developmental disabilities. So I grew up with her almost as if she were like a cousin, like a really close family friend. So it never really dawned on me, right? She was always treated with respect, as if she was part of the family. Nothing different, nothing special, right? It was just who she was, and it's how I was brought up to interact and be around someone with a disability with just pure respect, right? So it was natural. When my friends said that they were working there, I'm like, I'd love that. Can I do that? Yes, I can. Right. So I applied and started there, and it's got a very special place in my heart.
I love that. And now with your position at the South Shore Y, I know that it really is what led you to starting Merge, but was there some type of like aha moment that kind of made you realize, okay, something like Merge is necessary and this is going to be my next step?
Yeah, I literally remember the day. It was like a ton of bricks just hit me on the head, and I recall working with some maybe managers and programs at the Y, and it just dawned on me that everything that I was sharing and doing was coming out so naturally, and I thought, and they were embracing it, right? And they were like, oh, this is great, this is helpful, oh, I didn't know that. And it dawned on me that the rest of the world needs this, right?
Mm.
And I think one of the bigger factors in that decision is when the YUSA, so the YMCA of the USA, their headquarters in Chicago, they had asked me to co-lead a disabilities working group for Ys across the
Wow.
nation. And it was really that when a Y from another part of the country, right? Somebody from San Diego or down in Florida and Kentucky or, Illinois, right? Indiana would call me and say, Lisa, how do you do this? Or I'm following your newsletter and this is awesome. Can you tell me more? That was the moment that I was like, oh, wow, there's a tremendous need here. And I have this incredible background and experience, and really blessed with my background, recreation with this population, and then stepping into the Y, teaching the rest of the world. And my thought was, I can use this to help impact so many other communities. And I remember that being that big, oh, wow, we need to teach the rest of the world, because most people, unless they have a personal experience, don't have experience working with
Right.
folks with disabilities, right? It's something because of historically, folks, at least in my lifetime, were, segregated and they were institutionalized. So they weren't really members of our community. They're always, somewhere else in a special program or a building or another part of our community, not really members of our community. So it became apparent that a lot of people just need a little bit of understanding and training and help in that area. I find that most businesses want to do better. They just don't know how.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that the work that you did with the South Shore Y, with people being able to, from across the country, when you didn't even have your business yet, say, we need you, I think it's
Yeah.
a huge testament to the work that you've done and the incredible experience that you've built up. And what a question I have for you based on that is, how do people in different states and different areas like San Diego and Chicago hear about you and the work that you were doing? Was it some type of maybe award that you might have received or anything like that, just really helped to build your thought leadership and expertise?
Yeah, no, I started a newsletter to share with our community, with the South Shore YMCA community. And I started to find out that it was being shared all across. People were signing up from other Ys. So I believe I went to a conference. I forget. I was in Ohio. It was a Y. It was called DIG, Diversity Inclusion Global Network, right? So I went to that conference and I was in just in a session like everyone else. And they said, go around and introduce yourself. And I said, oh, I'm Lisa Drennan. I'm from South Shore YMCA. That's in Massachusetts. And everybody was like, and turned and looked at me and I was like, what's the matter? What did I say? They were like, you're Lisa Drennan. And I was like, yeah.
You're like, is that a bad thing?
Like, oh my gosh, you are our hero. And I think because what I was sharing was where Ys wanted to be, all the programming and the support. And, and I have to give credit where credit's due. The Y was very open and they were very, much behind and committed to creating not just programs for folks with disabilities. I always want to be very clear on that. It's a culture that invites everyone into all aspects of what you do. And that's difference, right? But that moment where everybody's looking at me, I'm like, oh, okay. They had followed this newsletter and apparently they shared it with other Ys. And there's great connections with Y. There's statewide and regional groups that when Ys were talking about it, my name apparently came up. So, yeah.
And that's also great for the South Shore Y because that helps to boost their expertise in that as well, because they had someone on their staff who is so well versed in that and able to provide that education to their community as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know at the time while I was there, the Y was very proud, and they continue on with so many of the supports and services that they offer. In fact, I just did a training for the South Shore Science Center, which is part of the South Shore Y, and that's based in Norwell, Mass. And it was just so good to be back there. I'm like, hello, I'm back. And the great thing there, when I walked in, there are strategies and techniques that I teach camps, and there's actual like physical resources that I implemented back in the day working at the Y. And when I walk into their camp and I see they're still using them, I'm like, yes, this is amazing. And they've gone through so many staff that don't even know me, right? And but the fact that they're my heroes over there, that they still utilize everything. They have their inclusion binders, they have their visual schedules, and all these tools that really help campers to be successful. They're using still after all these years, because I think I left in 2018, right when I started Merge. So that's a real like pump for me. Yeah.
Oh, yes. And another big testament to your work as well. And I
Yeah.
can imagine that when you started your business, because you already had handfuls of people coming to you looking for support, that you likely probably already had a book of clientele built up just from people coming to you and looking for support.
Yeah, absolutely. And the whys where I thought, oh, that's where I'll probably be spending a lot of my time. And I did, but then I also got into town recreation. So
Mm.
there's an organization called MRPA, Mass Recreation and Park Association. And I worked with one town local to me, Kingston, right next door. And that was my first gig. And I was so excited. And it was just, I think they saw me at a train. Someone saw me present at National Inclusion Project, which is in South Carolina. And then they were from, a local Massachusetts, and they were like, oh, can you come to our conference? I was still at the Y at the time. And I'm like, yeah, I think I can. Right. So I did, just as a favor. And then it was shortly after that where I'm like, I'm onto something here. The room's packed. I've got a lot of people going, whoa, we need this information. And that was kind of part of I think I need to go out and help more. So town recreations are a big part of my clientele as well.
I love that. And when you started Merge, did you kind of instantly like leave the Y and start your business, or was it maybe juggling a little bit of both where you were still working at the Y while building up Merge?
I'll tell this funny story. Hopefully your audience won't be too put off by it, but I was at my friend's house and she hired a psychic to come by. Fun, you
Ooh,
girls do that, right? And
yeah.
I knew I was going to be leaving the Y. I didn't know what it would look like or what. I guess I just wasn't sure exactly what it would look like if I were to leave the Y. And the psychic came in and she said to me immediately, you're thinking of making a big change, right? And of course, a lot of people are going, yeah, yeah, they probably say that to everybody. But she said, no, with your job, like going out on your own. And she described the process that was going on in my head. And she said to me, and my dad passed in 1992, she said, your dad is coming through and he's telling you, do it. Go ahead and do it. But here's your warning. It's not going to be easy. You're going to hit a lot of hurdles and some bitty. And I remember her saying that, like significant hurdles or something to that effect. But you're going to come through okay, and just stick with it, honey. Like that was with the message from my dad. I went home and I asked my husband, "Can I get on your insurance?" And he said yes. And I went to the Y next day and I just gave my notice.
Wow,
I
that's
just,
amazing.
I literally like, my dad said,
Yeah.
So I made that huge leap, came up with the name, just a logo, just came up with that quickly to start. And then I I just started,
Yeah,
it was a little scary at first, not getting a paycheck
absolutely.
for a while, it was a little hard and it was a little nerve wracking, right? Kind of when you start a business, you need something. I like cashed in some of my 401k just to kind of get me through 6 months, right? And then I realized
Yeah.
it's more than 6 months it takes, but whatever, I got through. I actually Ubered for a little while just to kind of balance out things.
Smart.
Yeah, right. It just for like, I think 6 months just to get myself. And then once I was up and rolling, then COVID hit.
Oh, yeah.
I think that was my warning from my dad that it would be tough and it was hard. I was 2 years in and
Yeah.
I really felt like, oh, I'm going to lose everything. And I just pivoted and actually came out of it stronger. So
Yeah, which makes me wonder if, because so many, obviously, pretty much all programs and departments and things like that had to go virtual, was that a huge opportunity for you to then spread your message across the country because you no longer needed to physically be in person and you were able to support many more organizations in that way?
yeah, I had never thought of doing virtual trainings, right? It just
Mm,
was, but why? I did, we went in person and I glad it was there, but I much prefer being in person and get you feel the energy. And of course,
Right.
I'm all zoomed out right now, but it really was. It was I remember that big girl moment where I was like, boo hoo hoo, I'm gonna lose my pull up those big girl pants, Lisa, you can do this, right? And I just thought, all right, I got to turn everything into, webinars. So I started to learn
Right.
how to do that. And, I changed my content to be able to fit into speaking to audiences. And I actually used premises of inclusion. 2 o'clock in the morning, and this thing came in my head. Those when the best things come in your head.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
and it was at the time where everything was starting to be canceled, right? The NBA was canceling and this was canceling everything. It was like March or
Mm.
April, right? And I just woke up and I'm like, inclusion's not canceled. I was just like really adamant, like we can't stop doing inclusion. And then I'm like, wait, I like that. Oh, inclusion's not canceled. So
Yeah.
I wrote to every organization that I knew, like, Mass Park and Recs or American Camp Society, American Camp Associations. And I just said, I'm creating, and I'll do it for free. I just wanted to keep my name out there. And I
Mm-hmm.
just offered trainings really based on, because you think about inclusion is really think about how we can help all to be meaningfully participating. So it was definitely more of a struggle during COVID for all. But here's the trick. Most people, we were like, oh, we're so isolated. People with disabilities lived like that before COVID. And
Right.
they continue to live in that way where they have a much higher rate of isolation and loneliness. So it just kind of, I pulled that all together and I came up with tips on, how to still stay, socially connected while being physically distanced, right? So it was all about
Right.
still staying socially connected. So that was my, kind of got me through the times in COVID until we were out presenting in person again.
I love that. And I can also imagine that with so many organizations going virtual, that it probably presented an opportunity for you to teach them how to incorporate inclusive practices virtually. So they
Yes.
might have inclusive practices in person, but being able to transition that into an online setting, an online space is crucial.
Absolutely, where there were a lot of education going on online. Actually, New England Village during COVID, they need a little help. They had some staff shortages and whatnot, and they said, "Can you come back and help teach some classes? Just to kind of fill some gaps here online." And it was through that process of going back and teaching the folks that I used to work with, and I created that idea of here are the strategies and best practices for teaching in a way that everybody who's on your screen is actively participating, right? It's hard. It's really hard, as we know, like cameras are all off or people are
Right.
talking over each other, or ideas or concepts are hard to portray if you don't have visual images to support it. So it was really important to develop those, best practices or next practices on how to teach online in a
Mm-hmm.
way that everybody can meaningfully participate. So everything I teach, of course, my core audience is folks with intellectual, developmental, other disabilities, but everything I teach is good principles and practices for everyone, right?
Right.
It's the inclusive practices benefit everyone. You don't have to have a diagnosis to benefit from them. They just make sense, right? And it helps to get more people in your group, your class, your business, your organization to be participating fully and sharing their strengths, right? And that's where the focus is, strengths focus.
Absolutely. And speaking of teaching, since we've been connected through social media for several months now, I always see you being immersed in conferences and taking part in educational opportunities yourself. So that way you're always on the pulse with new changes and developments that might be happening within this community. And so I'd love to hear more if you could share with our audience how you really help to learn about kind of the newest things that are happening and how you're able to communicate that information to your clients.
Yeah, no, that's really important. And as a person who does not identify as having a disability, it is crucial for me to really listen to the disability community. So I pop on webinars when people are speaking who have disabilities. I try to listen to them. I listen to podcasts all the time, or just talk to people and or family members. So if like a parent has a child with a disability, listening to them is the most important learning that I can do, because I'm kind of representing them as I speak, right? And we always want to be mindful of that. I can't teach like, oh, as a person with a disability, this is what I think will be better. So I have to listen to
Right.
them and then take all that information from all the different areas and put it into bite size too, so that an audience member can hear and listen and then make changes themselves on how they offer what they offer. Right. So yeah, no, that I think that's the most important thing, is listening to others. I also go to, say, rec conferences or camp conferences, right? Or where other people who run these offerings are, right? Or YMCA conferences, people who run YMCAs, they're there. And I listen to them to understand from that other, I kind of use that analogy of two sides of a bridge, right? So you've got this bridge and there's folks with disabilities and people who serve them here. And then on the other side of the bridge is the community, right?
Mhm.
Social rec, businesses, organizations here. And for the longest time, it's been a one-way street of folks with disabilities, their family members, agencies trying to help them to push out into the community. But if we don't train this other side of the bridge, it's just going to be a one-way street. So we need to strengthen
Right.
it from both sides, right? So I actually kind of teach on both sides as well. So I'll go to human service agency providers and also listen there and present if if I'm accepted as well. So
That's wonderful. And would you say that you're more partial to working with one side compared to another? Or do you really like them both equally?
I do in different ways.
Yeah.
I absolutely love, although it's exhausting, but I love I call it my camp staff training season. And I literally work, from January all the way until now. I feel like I'm still wrapping up. But June is so intense. I'm going from camp to camp to camp. Some of it with a
Mm.
lot of travel, some of them are local, rec programs, summer programs. And I'm just going to, impacting hundreds, thousands of people, right, by offering what I offer. So I enjoy that and I thrive off of it, but it's exhausting. And when I'm done,
Right.
I need to take a deep breath. But then intermingled throughout the rest of the year are agencies. I'm going to California in September, an agency called Compass Cares, and they are providing training and resources to community organizations like recreation, social organizations. So I'm coming in and doing trainings for them, for the community. So that's kind of exciting. But I love going back to my roots too, right? And talking to other, it's called direct support professionals or DSPs or other agencies that support folks with disabilities, because that's where I spend 30 years of my year,
Yeah.
30 years of my career there. And it's nice to kind of share. I was in your shoes. So I think there's more, they feel more of a connection to me when I do talk about community inclusion. I'm not just making up things that are just ridiculous, I've been in your shoes. I get it. I know how hard it is, but here are some things you can be doing to help the men and women or the individuals that you support to be members of our community. So I
Absolutely.
enjoy that as well. I like them both, differently, but I love the camp counselors because they're, 16 to 18 or 21 years old, and they are just ripe for the learning, right? I really enjoy.
Right. And I think that's the perfect age because that's when you started. You were 17 when you really got into this part of your career. And so I think there's something about kind of capturing people's interests like that when they're young that really sets them up for a whole lifetime of learning and education and finding something that they're passionate about.
Right, right. And everything that they're learning. So this, let's say a 17-year-old who goes through my training is not only learning that so that they can be a better camp counselor, but they're learning that for their next role, or when they, volunteer at
Right.
opportunities, or they get, grow up and have their own families, and, perhaps they end up in whatever, running a business, or being a scout leader or coach, or, very involved in their church. These same principles and practices can be utilized in all aspects of their lives. So I've changed their way of thinking, or at least expose them to a new way of looking at disability. So and that's going to impact them not just for this summer job, it's going to stay with them for life. So I think that's pretty powerful.
Absolutely. And one of the things that you mentioned a few minutes ago, is that right now, when you're in this time as of the recording, which is middle of July, kind of wrapping up that camp season, you did say that you kind of get to the point where you kind of need to take a break and rest, which I think is so important because, of course, the work that you do is very gratifying, but also does take a lot of your energy from that. And so, as a professional, what would you say is your kind of process or your steps for focusing on that self-care and kind of decompressing from the deep and important work that you do?
Yeah, no, very important. It can, first of all, it can be very isolating, right? You're just kind of,
Mm.
I'm running this business by myself, and it's exhausting and isolating, although I love the travel. But when I need to really recharge my batteries, my working out is that for me. Like this morning, I went, met a friend. We went for a long bike ride, and then
Oh, fun.
swim in the ocean, and then we, well, it's not legal, but we jumped off the Border Street Bridge. You're not supposed to, but we did, and it was just fun. And that was like, that just made me laugh and go like, okay, now I can go on with my day in
Yeah.
just a wonderful way. But I am, for 12 years now, I've been going to Ireland every year, and that's my peace and my
Oh my gosh,
centering
amazing.
myself and recharging my batteries. And I don't take any meetings during, I'll be there for just over 2 weeks. I
Mhm.
don't take any meetings. Really just, it's my quiet season, so it's
Yeah.
fine. It's just nice to recharge. Although I do meet with people there who end up being, somehow connected to either inclusion or the disability community. So that's nice, but it's fun. It's a good way to meet other people who are doing this kind of work, but in a different country.
Absolutely. And with you working out, I can totally relate to that because that's one thing I do every single morning is make sure to run because it really just moving your body, I find really puts you in the right mindset and sets you up to have a productive and energized day. And so from what you shared, it just kind of reinforces the importance of having those non-negotiables about what you absolutely must do for yourself each day as a business owner to keep being able to do what you're doing.
Absolutely. And that really, that time is not negotiable to me. And even when I get super busy, I still find, even if it's just a half hour something, I still do something every day. It could just be a walk, yoga, or a more intensive workout, or go for a bike ride or something like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so, with the community organizations that you work with, and especially organizations that have not consulted with someone like yourself, why is it so important for these organizations to prioritize an inclusion, especially now in the year 2023?
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, this is so important. And I know that there's so many initiatives around DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. But typically, the dimensions of diversity that are being focused on are around race, sexual identities, gender identity, around that area, and not disability. In fact, disability is usually like kind of an add-on or only if requested. And I think it's really important, if any business or organization is out there and listening and saying, yeah, we do DEI, but do you focus on that dimension of diversity around disability and ability level, because that's really
Mm.
important. And that can span, often people think about, oh, someone with Down syndrome, or someone with that has autism, and that's where their minds might go. But it's so much more, right?
Right.
70% of disabilities are hidden and non-apparent, right? You don't know that a person might be going through. And it can range from, physical disability to learning, developmental, social emotional, right, neurological, medical complexity. See, it's so vast, and it is the largest minority group in the world. And here's the ticker, that it's the only minority group that you and I can join in a split second, right? An
Yeah.
accident or an injury or something happens, and we can be either temporary or permanently disabled. So it's important to know that this impacts everyone. So to be disability inclusive and to be mindful of practices that really help welcome and engage and support, your employees, your clients, your customers, really thinking about that in all aspects. Any person, right? There's so many benefits, and they far outweigh the. I don't. I know it's with perhaps good, intention, or people are thinking, oh, I heard it's really expensive, or this or that, or we just don't know. And there's a lot of hurdles of why a business chooses not to focus on this. But I can help you break those down, because it really, most of those hurdles are not accurate, right? And in fact, most businesses think that it's very expensive to become disability inclusive. You have to hire specialists or whatnot, and you really don't, right?
Right.
And there's actually more financial benefits for businesses to become more inclusive in their practices, things that you wouldn't even think of, right? It's going to increase your client base, right? And it's more than just the right thing to do, and that should never be the primary reason. It's a good business
Exactly.
sense. It's a good business sense to become disability inclusive, especially, and I'll ask this in an audience if I'm working, say I did a presentation at a human rights or an NHR conference. And, I said, everybody raise your hand if your organization or business has any job openings. And everybody's hand goes up, of course, right? Everybody. Have you thought about seeking to hire a person with a disability in that role, like really reaching out and welcoming them? We can figure out, if you have the right mindset, we can figure out accommodations, how we can help that person be successful. And you're going to have, in statistics show that individuals with disabilities stay longer, and they fill workforce gaps, right? That and they're just a positive entity. They are more creative, and they figure out, because you got to think, somebody maybe who utilizes a wheelchair, they have to navigate this whole world and figure out how to get around everything. So they're going to be great problem solvers,
Oh, yes,
They're going to be the
absolutely.
go-getters, right? Because their whole life has been, or however long they've been utilizing a wheelchair, figuring out how to navigate a world that is not very welcoming, accessibility-wise. So there's benefits, and I, would highly encourage any business to reach out and just, talk about what can you be doing.
Absolutely. And you had mentioned that assumption that many businesses might think that becoming inclusive is very expensive and something that's very time consuming and heavily resourceful to do. But you're exactly right, it's not. And so I can imagine, not that I want to speak for companies, but I can imagine that one thing that might, I don't want to say prevent, but one thing that might kind of hinder or slow their determination to become more inclusive is almost like that analysis paralysis, where they just don't know where to start or where to even begin with becoming more inclusive. So, in
Right.
that aspect, what would you say is a good first step for any organization who is really intentional and really focused on building an inclusive environment?
Yeah, no, first I would say, congratulations. This is a great step for you. And then let's talk, right? So, any client that I would work with, I want to understand, where are you at right now, right? And what are your practices in place already? And if not, where do you want to be? And then I'll, help you to get there. And most of what I, offer support is the training for supervisors and peers, right? And I would always encourage, because there's somewhat of a I think in our society, we think of, oh, there's that special program that this company does where they hire folks and they do things off to the side. But you be very careful not to fall into that trap that you can hire folks. They bring their own staff and they're kind of over there doing some kind of job, right? Or, maybe coffee shops that are just folks with disabilities. I think it run by just folks with disabilities and the staff who support them. And there's a place for that, but here's my point. Should only be a stepping stone toward full inclusion. So meaning,
Mm-hmm.
if somebody were to work in a setting, I know, for instance, like CVS, the company CVS, they have programs set up for folks with disabilities, and they come in with their own staff, and they, set them all up, do great training and whatnot, but that should only be a stepping stone in my mind. To then that person should be considered an employee whenever possible. Maybe they need that little bit of training and support to start, but we can't fall into that trap of like, oh, they're good, we have this special program for them over here.
Right.
What I'm talking about is within your organization, your community, your business. How do we create, the culture where somebody can be successful with built-in supports, not yeah, but they have to bring their own staff, or can their family member come? That's not how you and I go to a job or work, right? And it
Exactly.
shouldn't be how we expect somebody with a disability to do that. So I would encourage businesses to explore the different resources out there, but really make sure we're moving towards what I call authentic inclusion, where you take the existing, right, program system business and you find ways how to support a person more naturally in an existing setting, not creating a special program for them, different or separate, where they're not really a part of the team or part of your business, right? That's what we want ultimately. So reach out, start having the conversations, know the difference between the two, because often they fall into that trap of creating special programs for special people. And that's, as you can tell by my expressions, it's not a favorite approach of mine, right? I just want us to all think about what can we do in our existing business model to help welcome in and support and engage and help persons with disabilities to be successful right out of the gate, but more so, help peers and supervisors.
Right.
And thinking about it, if you have 100 employees, there's a very good chance that 20 of them have some type of disability going on. You may not know about it, right? So for us to learn inclusive practices can really help with productivity and just team building and culture, because now not only are you practicing it more intentionally, but side by side, your peers, your colleagues might also be benefiting from something, because maybe they're, experience anxiety or ADHD, and all these practices are good for everybody. So it just helps us open our mind to different ways to supporting all of our employees.
I love that. And that reminds me of a coffee shop that just opened a few months ago, as of the time of this recording, in my hometown of Bridgewater, which is called the Boundless Bean.
Yep.
And they primarily employ people with disabilities, which I think is wonderful. That's who their baristas are, people with all kinds of disabilities. And so that's one thing that I've seen happen more so over the past few years, is a lot in like the food service industries, where there will be other coffee shops that might have a big employee base of people with disabilities, which I think really is a catalyst for encouraging other companies to do the same. And so I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on that as a business model and a great inclusion practice.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I do see them popping up, and I kind of have like mixed feelings about it. I think
Right.
on one hand, it's a great opportunity for someone to learn a skill, right? And hopefully learn that skill so that they could walk into any other coffee shop or any other, Starbucks or wherever, have this new business skill that they can move towards that. So that's why I always say specialized programs like that should always be a stepping stone toward learning how to become fully included. So,
Mm.
and the other thing is like how society sees this, and I know this gets a little bit like deep into thinking, is that, oh, isn't that cute? These special people have their special job, and it perpetuates
Right.
this idea that they need to have separate coffee shops for them, and we'll go patronize
Mm.
them because they're cute, and that's sweet. And I know I'm patronizing
It
here, but
makes total
just to
sense.
make
Yeah.
the point that just perpetuates society's idea of people with disabilities have to have special programs, and so it's
Mm.
not necessarily, in my mind, sometimes I get it, it's a
Right.
little hard, but I recognize it, and I know that someone that might be their choice to do that. We should all always recognize it should be somebody's choice, but I don't want it to be limiting. Like, it's somebody just with Down syndrome comes to my coffee shop. You know what? They have that special one down the street. You should go there because they hire your folks. That's segregation.
Oh, yeah.
plain and simple, right? But that's what happens when we have a lot of that. And I get it, and I don't mean to like, put down, just how society sees it, but it's the truth. It perpetuates that idea that special people need special supports, and then that kind of hurts the overall initiative towards full inclusion. I don't know if that makes sense, but that,
Makes
like, in
total
my
sense.
head, it's making like it's sometimes it can do a little bit more damage than it might do benefits. But it just means we need to work harder to find other businesses, coffee shops, restaurants that are willing to be more inclusive in their practices and hire folks with disabilities. So we can also see them at, someone with a disability working at the restaurant 2 doors down,
Yep.
or at the bank, or at, hairdressers, or any other local business. So as long as they're both happening, what we don't want is just special only, and that's, oh no, that's where you should work. Oh, there should be choice, right? There should be choice. So we have to work just as hard to make sure authentic inclusion is available as well as an option in choice. So
yeah, you nailed it.
If they're done right, I could, maybe say that, all right, I can see this, but we don't want to just stop and people only work there if they have a disability. So
Exactly.
that's my message,
Oh,
that's
yeah. And on that note, building an inclusive environment and becoming inclusive requires and involves a lot of education. And so, with organizations who are looking to incorporate inclusive practices, do you have your favorite resources that you might recommend to them, whether it's like an online platform or resource for just kind of teaching themselves or learning or anything like that?
Yeah, no, of course. Like, number one, I would say follow me, because I follow a lot of
Absolutely.
organizations, and then they might see who I'm following, right? Like, if you're in the education field, I always say, if you're a teacher, paraprofessional, working anywhere in the education field, follow Think Inclusive, right? Because they're talking about inclusion and how to make it work in school systems. So that would be one area, right? And it depends where you're coming from. If you're in the fitness area, I have a colleague, Brendan, and he runs AdaptX, and he's just doing fabulous work in helping to educate fitness and fitness and wellness organizations to be more inclusive. So, I would say follow him. So it depends where you're coming from. But look at the leaders, look who's already doing it. If you happen to walk into a bank, or you go into another business and you see that folks with disabilities are being hired, right, and are working there successfully, talk to them and say, how did you start? What did, you know, is this hard? Has it been difficult? Here's some of the concerns we have. So that's what I would always recommend too. Talk to a business that's already doing it and doing it successfully, because that can be your mentor for helping you. Particularly if you're a small business, it might be like, oh, a little overwhelming, right? But it can work, right? That's yeah, that would be my suggestion. But certainly reach out. And if I always, I work with businesses as well. But if something were a little bit, kind of a little bit out of my wheelhouse or whatnot, I would connect you, depending on the type of business and the scope of the work, to the right person who would be a good fit if I feel like I can't do it.
Great advice. And on the topic of recommended resources, what would you say are your favorite local businesses to support?
Anything food. Yeah, and I have a rule that I don't go to chain stores, like chain
I
restaurants or
really
whatnot.
don't either. So I'm with you on that one.
Yeah, I just feel like that mom and pop, I want to give them the support. And even when I travel, I do a lot of traveling, and it's so funny. I'll ask someone, who I meet wherever, and say, where do you like to go? And they'll be like, Applebee's. And I'm like, oh,
No.
okay, no, not looking for that, but so I do enjoy good food, right? And I would say there's a new bakery. I live in Pembroke, so there's a new bakery. I think it's Zerbo, and it's a mixture, a Hungarian and Caribbean, and it is just
Ooh.
amazing. So that's my new favorite, and they carry a lot of different kind of sauces and jams, and by local vendors. So I like that too. I
Mhm.
always want to support local, so
Absolutely.
that's my favorite bakery. And my another favorite store, and I'm getting ready to go there because I usually get my guests, my friends in Ireland, a little gift from here. It's the Plymouth Winery, right? The Plymouth Bay Winery, because they'll have cranberry wine. I used to get a bottle of that, but they have these amazing jellies and jams and sauces with cranberries, which are, kind of my hometown gift. So I like stopping by there every August before I go to Ireland and pack my suitcase with a bunch of gifts for people and friends that I'm still yet to meet.
Love it. Lisa, this has been such an awesome episode, and I've really enjoyed having the opportunity to share more about you and what you do with our listeners. And now I'd like if you could share where they can find you online in case they'd like to connect with you further.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me here. You can connect with me, and my email is lisadrennan@mergeconsulting.org. But please jump onto my website, mergeconsulting.org. And from there, you can connect with my link tree or shoot me an email, and I'll share with you deeper ways to follow me on social media as well. I have Facebook and Instagram, and I'd love when people follow me and share their stories of inclusion as well with my audiences.
Wonderful. And I will link to those in the show notes. That way our listeners can click through and connect with you from there. But thank you so much again for being today's guest.
Thank you for having me. It was my pleasure.